We got some updates for you in the Sean Diddy Combs case. The music mogul and apparent leader of an alleged criminal enterprise was rushed to the hospital over the weekend. And this at the same time as a co-defendant in one of his civil rape cases is fighting back and coming directly for one of the lawyers.
The courtroom was silent, but not the kind of silence that brought peace. It was heavy, thick, and suffocating. The kind that made every breath echo. The silence before something explosive.
Okay, so we have an update now when it comes to Sean Diddy Combs. And the first one, unexpected. Apparently, it's being reported that he left the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn last week. This is where he's currently being housed as he waits trial in May on criminal charges. And he left to get an MRI at a nearby hospital. So the New York Post reports that the 55-year-old rapper was moved to Brooklyn Hospital Thursday night for the scan. And according to a source, the MRI was for apparent knee pain. Combs has reportedly dealt with knee problems since running the New York Marathon back in the early 2000s. Combs, by the way, used that race to raise millions of dollars for New York City children. And the source told the New York Post that Combs was moved at night to try to keep the exam as low-key as possible. But clearly it became public, and Combs reportedly didn't stay overnight, went back to the cell once the exam was over. Combs' attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told TMZ, "I cannot comment on anything related to prisoner movements. Also, I'm not commenting on anything related to possible medical issues." As he shouldn't, that is private information. The only way it really would come up during the course of the criminal case is if you say it somehow relates to his detention or somehow relates to his movements or any certain accommodations should be made, sentencing if he's ultimately convicted. But right now, we won't know more information. In the meantime, let's talk about the fact that Combs' co-defendant in a civil case, a case, by the way, that accuses him and this co-defendant, another A-lister, of rape, this guy is once again slamming the attorney behind the case, insisting that he be sanctioned for allegedly not doing his job. We're talking, of course, about Sean Carter, better known as Jay-Z, once again calling out attorney Tony Busby, calling out his character, more specifically into question, claiming that the Texas attorney's filings have, quote, substantial inaccuracies and that there was a failure to properly investigate before filing. Now, we've talked about this before, but basically, a civil lawsuit was filed against Sean Combs on behalf of a Jane Doe who says that she was raped by Combs and another celebrity at a home after the Video Music Awards in 2000. She says she was just 13 years old when this happened. And weeks after the initial filing, Busby submitted an amended complaint naming Jay-Z as the celebrity who allegedly participated in this assault. Both rappers have adamantly denied the allegations, Jay-Z on the offensive, arguing that Jane Doe's story is full of holes, that all of this should have been obvious to any competent attorney who was going to take her case. And this isn't the first time that Jay-Z has gone after Tony Busby. In fact, earlier this month, the rapper filed a motion seeking dismissal and sanctions, accusing Busby of failing to properly vet the accuser's claims. And now Jay-Z is doubling down, saying, in fact, that Busby never even met Jane Doe before filing the lawsuit. That is a stunning allegation. So let's dig into the latest filing, because it reads, quote, "A principled attorney, when confronted with factual inconsistencies that cast grave doubt on horrific allegations and reveal the inadequacy of any pre-filing inquiry, would reconsider the lawsuit. Instead, plaintiff's lead attorney, Anthony Busby, tried to gloss over them. Initially, he deflected, saying plaintiff's case was referred to his firm by another who vetted it prior to sending it to him, and that his firm would continue to vet her claims and collect corroborating data. Now, he concedes that he did not even meet with plaintiff before signing his name to the complaint and fails to identify any evidence that corroborates anything his client alleged." So Jay-Z's legal team points out that despite having litigated this case for months in the Southern District of New York, Busby has not sought admission to that court, meaning he hasn't filed a motion to appear pro hoc vice and pay the associated fees. So you're not licensed to practice in New York, but you get a temporary permission.
Sean Diddy Combs sat at the defense table, shoulders tight, eyes darting around as if searching for control. He had endured weeks of damning testimonies, waves of accusations, and endless headlines tearing down his empire. Yet he believed. The worst was behind him until the judge read the next witness's name, Sean Jay-Z Carter. The air shifted instantly. Gasps cut through the silence. Reporters gripped their pens tighter. Jurors leaned forward. Spectators froze in disbelief. Diddy went rigid, his jaw dropping as though the words had knocked the air out of him. For a moment, he looked like a man who couldn't process what he had just heard. Jay-Z, his peer, his longtime ally, his brother, in power, was about to take the stand. The doors opened. Jay-Z walked in with that same calm, measured stride, his face unreadable.
By Jay-Z and Sean Combs. And by the way, she also claims there was a female celebrity who was there, saw this, but has not been identified in this complaint. Now, Jane Doe claims that she ran from the home, found a gas station, called her father, he picked her up. The problem with all of that is there was bombshell reporting from NBC News, and it kind of put a spotlight on some serious apparent flaws in her recollection. In fact, NBC interviewed Jane Doe as well as her father, who says he has no memory whatsoever of making what would be an hours-long drive to pick up his teenage daughter. And according to Busby, some of his colleagues, they did the background work on the lawsuit. But the defense points out that Busby signed his name to this complaint, so any alleged inconsistencies, that's on him. And we'll talk more about what these inconsistencies or apparent inconsistencies are. But Jane Doe has acknowledged there might be problems in her account, but it doesn't take away from the fact that she says this happened to her. But the filing reads, quote, having purportedly left the requisite vetting to others, Mr. Busby cannot now properly serve as the lone declarant, attesting to matters that are outside his personal knowledge and known only to non-declarants who sit silent. He cannot continue post-complaint to whistle past demonstrated inaccuracies in plaintiff's allegations that are staring him in the face. An attorney who fails to investigate adequately before filing a complaint, particularly one alleging serious criminal conduct that will inevitably cause reputational harm, is subject to Rule 11 sanctions. And sanctions can include things like, having to pay a penalty to the court or cover the other party's legal fees. Rule 11 sanctions are pretty high up there. I've talked about it before. You're talking about submitting something that is not based in fact or law, that you're only filing something to harass another party. Really, really bad conduct. But the lawsuit lays out what Jay-Z and his team claim are some of Busby's alleged bad acts in connection with Jane Doe's lawsuit. As to Mr. Busby's reliance on other lawyers and a retired police detective to interview plaintiff and fact-check her account, none of those individuals has even been named, let alone produced as a declarant. Nor does the opposition specify which aspects of plaintiff's complaint were fact-checked. Most strikingly, there is no claim that anyone asked the plaintiff's father, a key participant and ready interviewee, whether he remembered his chapter in the FAC's remarkable saga, to which the answer would have been no. And the lawsuit also has a chart that highlights 9 facts that Busby mentioned in the amended complaint, which the defense objects to. So the first allegation is that a friend drove Jane Doe from Rochester to New York City. And Jay-Z's team says that this was never fact-checked. And that when Busby, his legal team, was asked to identify who this person was, they said it was a 20-year-old who unfortunately is now dead. Second, that plaintiff watched the VMAs on a Jumbotron, while the filing...
His body language revealed nothing, but everyone in the room knew this wasn't just another witness. This was betrayal no one saw coming, the twist that turned the trial into history. Each step Jay-Z took toward the stand sent shockwaves through. The courtroom. Diddy's disbelief turned to anger in real time. He leaned forward, whispering sharply to his attorney, gripping the table until his knuckles went white. To the spectators, it was like watching a man realize his walls of protection had just been torn down from within. Jay-Z raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Calm, steady, prepared. Perhaps he had rehearsed this moment in his mind. The prosecutor wasted no time, sliding a thick folder in front of Jay-Z. He opened it slowly.
Who says that he was assaulted at the Intercontinental Hotel in 2020 after working for Sean Combs for years. According to the complaint, plaintiff met defendant Sean Combs in about 2006 when Sean Combs hired plaintiff to run errands for him in his capacity as CEO of Bad Boy Records. In or about February 2020, plaintiff set up a meeting with defendant Sean Combs through Combs' assistant to discuss missing job payments. And that meeting was at the Intercontinental New York, which, by the way, has been mentioned before in another Sean Combs lawsuit, because according to Cassandra Ventura, that was actually the site of a freak-off in 2013 that ended with Combs being charged tens of thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. So going back to this lawsuit, during this meeting with Sean Combs, John Doe alleges that he was alone with the Bad Boy CEO, and this was after security had left the room. Combs, according to him, reportedly made the two drinks. John Doe started to get really tired, claims Combs suggested lie down, take a nap, and he says when he woke up, Sean Combs was assaulting him. Again, very consistent pattern in these allegations between all three men. According to the complaint, after this rape, defendant Sean Combs told plaintiff that going to the police will make plaintiff, quote, look like an idiot, and that because Combs is Diddy, plaintiff would never be able to substantiate his claims against Combs. He also claims that men from defendant Sean Combs' entourage also called plaintiff on his cell phone to threaten and intimidate plaintiff into silence after the sexual assault. So again, these lawsuits have been filed against not only Combs, but also his companies, which the John Does argued they were responsible for knowing what the rabber was up to and failing to do anything to stop it, that they helped provide the means for Combs to keep up this alleged misconduct. All right, so I am joined right now by the attorney who is representing these three men suing Sean Combs. Thomas Jifra joins us right now. Thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I had when I saw this, and it's a question I have a lot when you're seeing a number of these Sean Combs lawsuits coming out, is why file now? Why come forward now with these claims?
Well, it's in a lot of cases, when you have serial sex abuse like this or any kind of a sexual assault, it's very difficult for the victims to come forward. There's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment. And in Sean Combs' case is a lot different in that all three of my victims after the assault were all threatened. So there was a very real threat and fear that something bad could happen to them if they came forward. And I think once everything became public, there's strength in numbers. And when they saw that they would be safe, they felt comfortable coming forward and seeking to hold him accountable for what he did to them.
Did they ever, either now or at some point in the past, did they ever report this to police?
No, did not.
Have they?
His eyes scanned the evidence. Then in that deep, deliberate voice once heard across stadiums, Jay-Z began to speak. He confirmed meetings. He confirmed conversations. He described dealings behind closed doors. Arrangements tied directly to Diddy's empire and its darker corners. This wasn't rumor. This was detail, precise, sharp. The jury's eyes widened. Reporters scribbled furiously. Spectators whispered so loudly the judge had to call for order. Diddy unraveled in real time. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He shook his head again and again. Finally, he slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "That's not true."
Is going to rule on key pieces of evidence. The prosecution says defense counsel's proposal that the Enterprise letter be filed prior to pretrial motions is contrary to the practice in this district and inefficient, given that pretrial motions could impact the substance of the letter. So again, they're saying them laying out their entire case and what they have, it's too premature. The court has to work out other issues before we can submit the letter. And the government argues that Combs isn't playing fair. Quote, the defendant was arrested in September 2024, and the trial date was set at the defendant's insistence for May 5th, 2025, a span of fewer than 8 months. The defendant is trying to have his cake and eat it too here by insisting on a speedy trial, but also insisting on deadlines in cases with much longer timelines. And by the way, speaking of the defense, here is their position on the Enterprise letter. They write, quote, Mr. Combs is at a significant disadvantage. Defense counsel still do not understand the contours of the government's allegations, including who the government even considers a victim, and have repeatedly asked for assistance from the government. Unless and until the government is required to make trial disclosures, the defense will remain ignorant of the evidence it is required to meet. The result will be a fundamentally flawed trial. Accordingly, Mr. Combs proposes that the government file its enterprise letter by February 1st, 2025. So that is less than a month away. That's just a few weeks away. So that is one disclosure issue in this letter. Also in the letter, we move on to notices regarding who will be called as expert witnesses and rebuttal expert witnesses. So here, the prosecution is proposing that all parties, the prosecution and the defense, provide notice of their experts about 8 weeks before trial, March 7th, 2025. And rebuttal experts, if there are any, 2 weeks later, by March 21st. So that is 6 weeks before trial. And the reason that you need to provide notice to the other side of who you're planning to call is because opposing sides need time to vet the reliability and the relevance of expert witnesses. In the law, we call that the Daubert standing or briefing on Daubert. Now, the prosecution says here's the problem. Combs' lawyers have indicated they are not going to provide their notice of who their experts are until the prosecution first provides their experts. And the prosecution says that's inefficient. It won't provide them enough time to file challenges, and that is inconsistent with how things are done here. And speaking of the defense, they say, yeah, prosecution, you know what? You should present notice of your experts by March 7th, 2025. Then we'll provide notice of our experts for the first time on March 21st, 2025. And then, government, you can provide your rebuttal experts on March 28th. And despite the prosecution's argument, the defense is saying this is consistent with how things are done and what the federal rules of criminal procedure say. And there's a special rule about that. Perhaps both sides will debate on if the defense has to disclose their experts, only if the defense first requests the same from the government. It gets a little complicated, but it's going to be a back and forth about when exactly the defense has to submit their experts to the prosecution because, again, both sides need time to prepare challenges to those experts. From there, we have something called 404B 413 notice. So this is about evidence of other crimes or acts or wrongs that were committed by Sean Combs that may be used to show things like motive or lack of accident or that there was a plan. And also, this concerns evidence of other sexual assaults. So basically what we're talking about is what the government plans to introduce.
The judge's gavel pounded, demanding silence, but the damage was done. The image was burned into everyone's mind. Diddy losing control while Jay-Z calmly tore down his defenses. Page by page, statement by statement, Jay-Z revealed the hidden truths, transactions buried, conversations dismissed as rumors, connections denied in public, now laid bare under courtroom light. Every word was another crack in the empire Diddy had built for decades. Spectators sat stunned, mouths open, faces covered in disbelief. This was more than testimony. It was betrayal at the highest level. For years they stood side by side, symbols of wealth and power. Now one was testifying against the other, shattering the unity that kept so many secrets buried.
The scope of alleged illegal activity from just freak-offs. This is beyond just freak-offs. Why? Because in the superseding indictment, it says now some of the commercial sex acts were freak-offs. So you have commercial sex acts that could be illegal that don't, again, rise to the level of freak-offs. There was also another line in the superseding indictment that was new, and I want to tell you about it. It says on page 6, in connection with the commercial sex acts, Combs provided the victims with, among other things, monetary payments, career opportunities, and payment of rent and housing expenses. That is a new line. And it seems to me what they're really trying to do, prosecutors here, are trying to explain the commercial element of these acts, providing or promising something of value to coerce these people into doing this. Now, by the way, the defense will say, look, Sean Combs, if these were his girlfriends or these were his romantic partners, don't boyfriends pay for gifts? Don't they give them money if they need it? Don't they help them out? This is not sex trafficking. This is a relationship. That is what I anticipate we will hear from the defense. Okay, now we have another big change in this superseding indictment. Actually, it's a whole new paragraph. This wasn't in the original indictment. This is the new paragraph in the superseding indictment. Quote, other commercial sex acts involved only Combs and a female victim. As with freak-offs, other members and associates of the Combs enterprise assisted with arrangements for these commercial sex acts, including by arranging travel and accommodations for victims. At times, Combs, with the assistance of other members and associates of the enterprise, transported and caused to be transported victims across state lines and internationally in connection with the commercial sex acts. Like the freak-offs, these commercial sex acts involving Combs and a female victim were prearranged, sometimes lasted multiple days, were sometimes electronically recorded by Combs, and often involved Combs distributing a variety of controlled substances to the victim, in part to keep the victim obedient and compliant. So that is very, very similar to the description of the freak-offs. I guess what's happening here, prosecutors might be looking at their case and saying, we're going to describe these alleged illegal sexual episodes, these instances of sex trafficking, and if the term freak-off wasn't used, or it's not characteristic of a freak-off, then a jury could look at this and say, you know, prosecutors, I don't think this is a freak-off, as you described. But now broadening it to say, we're talking about generally illegal commercial sex acts that may or may not be freak-offs, that is how they're trying to win this case. That's my take, at least. And I think this is really to solidify and crystallize that sex trafficking charge. And you see the addition of commercial sex acts with the freak-offs. For instance, we see lines like this one in the superseding indictment that creates that separation. Quote, Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs and other commercial sex acts. Okay, now we have another line that was changed from the original indictment. In the original indictment, it read, Combs also threatened victims' careers and livelihoods, including if they resisted participating in freak-offs. In the new indictment, it says, Combs also threatened victims' careers and livelihoods, including if they resisted engaging in sex acts with Combs and at times with Combs and male commercial sex workers. They're going beyond the specificity of freak-offs. Okay, we have another change that's pretty notable too. So both indictments, they share a paragraph where they discuss how Combs, if anyone threatened him, if anyone threatened his authority or reputation, meaning employees or witnesses to his alleged abuse, he would take action. Prosecutors say that would include committing acts of violence. But here is where the indictments are different. In the original indictment,
Diddy leaned back,
his eyes darted
shaking his
around
head,
wildly,
muttering
from the
under
jury
his
to
breath
the judge to the
as
cameras
Jay-Z's
pointed at
words
him,
filled the
as if
room.
searching for someone to
His
shut it all
eyes
down.
darted
His
wildly
attorneys
from the
tried
jury
calm
to the
him,
judge
but he was
to the
beyond
cameras.
calming. His disbelief
His attorneys
had
tried to
transformed
calm
into
him, but
rage.
he was beyond
His composure
calming.
replaced by desperation.
Rage
He knew
overtook
what
him.
this meant. If Jay-Z was
Composure
willing to
collapsed into
testify, it
desperation.
meant the bond they once
He
had was
knew what this
broken
meant.
beyond repair,
Their
and
bond
the
was
evidence
broken
being
beyond
shared was
repair,
strong enough to drag
and
him
the evidence
deeper
was
into a
strong
pit
enough
he
to
couldn't
drag
climb
him
out of.
deeper into a pit
Diddy's
he
face
couldn't
went
escape.
pale. He shifted uncomfortably in
Diddy's
his chair,
face went
his eyes
pale,
darting from the
shifting
prosecutor
nervously
to
in his
Jay-Z,
chair.
as if begging for this to
He
stop.
stared at
This was
Jay-Z,
betrayal
almost
at the highest
begging
level.
for it to stop.
A friend turned into
But
the
Jay-Z
most
kept
dangerous
going.
enemy imaginable.
Every word landed
Jay-Z
like a
spoke
hammer.
landed like a
Each
hammer,
detail
driving
another nail
into
in
the
the
coffin
coffin
of Diddy's
defense.
The courtroom
At one
gasped as
point,
Jay-Z
the
revealed
prosecutor asked
conversations,
directly,
meetings,
did
and
Diddy
agreements that
orchestrate
had
the
long been
darker
buried in
dealings
secrecy.
tied to the
He
case?
spoke of things only
The
an
room
insider
froze.
could know. Details
Jay-Z
that
looked
left the
ahead,
jury
steady,
wide-eyed
and
and the
gave one
gallery
word.
whispering in shock.
Yes.
For years.
In the first place, obviously nothing goes away in the blink of an eye, excuse me. But in your opinion, watching all of this legal back and forth that's been unfolding these past few months, do you think there is enough to dismiss, or do you think at a point this will even get litigated?
I think it's going to get litigated. If I had to guess, I haven't really studied the complaint against the motion to dismiss, so I don't have a advanced opinion about it. But my reaction to it is that the complaint accuses him of some very bad stuff, and that ought to be enough to move the case forward. That's my guess. Now, remember, at the outset of these litigations, we go through kind of a honing phase where the dispute is sort of narrowed down to certain parties and certain claims. And sometimes a motion to dismiss doesn't get rid of the case entirely, but it gets rid of some of the claims, or it gets rid of some of the parties. I see today, by way of example, there's a brand new filing dismissing defendant Bad Boy Records LLC. There were separate claims against that company, and I don't know where all these companies fit in the pantheon of Bad Boy Records, but that company has been dismissed voluntarily from the action. And you'll see that kind of thing at the beginning of civil litigation. The parties and the claims have to be sorted out, and then the case can proceed with discovery.
And we do want to mention to our viewers there that even though Bad Boy Records was dismissed off that complaint, Sean Carter and Sean Combs are both still named there. I also want to talk to you, Rich, about a point that Jay-Z's lawyer made previously, and that was that Tony Busby never even met with this Jane Doe, despite saying in that press conference back in October that his firm vetted all of the claims. What are your thoughts on that, given that Busby is standing behind Jane Doe and the allegations that she made?
Yeah, well, so Busby, or certainly somebody from Busby's office, should be meeting with these plaintiffs before bringing claims. I mean, you should always meet with your client before you go charging into court with a claim, but all the more so when they're salacious, provocative, inflammatory claims like the ones in this case. You do have an obligation to make sure there's a good faith basis for proceeding with the claims. You have to make sure there aren't any red flags that would indicate the claim is false or being concocted, just to extort the parties. You have to do some due diligence. And Busby runs a big firm, and he says he has 120 or so, that was the last number I heard, clients who are potentially bringing claims here. So I'm not saying he had to meet personally with her, but certainly somebody at his firm should have. And I don't know if that happened or not, but if they didn't, I would think they had a little explaining to do.
And do you think it was overly ambitious for him to tout that he was filing 120 lawsuits against Diddy with these big names attached, when really that number was lesser than that? And the only big name that he had added to
The courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouts, people covering their mouths in shock. The judge slammed his gavel again and again, but order was gone. Diddy shot up, pointing furiously at Jay-Z, shouting while his attorney tried to pull him back. Security moved closer. It was chaos. Diddy's composure had shattered completely, his meltdown on full display. Jay-Z, in contrast, sat calm, hands folded, eyes forward, refusing to engage. One man unraveling, the other steady. By the time Jay-Z finished, the damage was irreversible. The jurors had heard it. The judge had seen it. The reporters had captured every second. This wasn't just testimony. This was betrayal. The moment Diddy's empire cracked beyond repair. Jay-Z stepped down. Silence returned. But this time, it was heavier. Final. The silence of downfall echoing through the courtroom. Diddy slumped in his chair, disbelief frozen on his face, his empire collapsing as the weight of Jay-Z's words hung in the air. The trial would go on, but nothing would ever be the same. The world had just witnessed not only the fall of a mogul, but the destruction of a brotherhood once thought unbreakable.